My family mocked my hobby business. "You'll never make it," they said. "Today I made $3 million in one deal." They asked for a cut. I cut them off forever. I'm Owen, and I'm 32 years old. 3 years ago, if you had asked me what the Christmas season meant, I probably would have replied, family, food, laughter, and traditions. However, after the previous year, I feel like the holiday season has become more significant. That night, I sat at a long wooden table with the people who had reared me and were meant to love me unconditionally, and with each derisive chuckle they gave me, I felt smaller. It was the kind that cuts deep, derisive laughter that makes you pretend to smile while your insides twist, rather than the kind that is warm and joyful. My family placed a high importance on conventional achievement when I was growing up. My dad worked in finance and was committed to the 9-to-5 grind. He had a stable job, benefits, and a mortgage by the age of 35. With rigorous scheduling and little time for waste, my mom managed the household like a business. My younger brother Ryan went into accounting and was hailed as though he had saved the family on his own, while my sister Scarlett became a lawyer and was immediately dubbed the golden child of the family. And then there was me. I launched an internet business because I didn't want to conform to the corporate mold. They all warned me I was wasting my time, but at first it was just a side project, an idea I worked on late at night in my tiny apartment. I had been working on my startup for nearly 4 years by the time the holiday season arrived the following year. I wasn't swimming in cash yet, but it was finally starting to pick up some steam. Although I knew they wouldn't comprehend, I kept it to myself at family get-togethers in the hopes that they would at least acknowledge the effort and tenacity I was putting forth. Instead, there was a brief silence in the room when my uncle inquired about my business. My sister then scoffed. My mother, my own mother, laughed, and my father grinned. As if dismissing a child's fantasy, she waved her wine glass and exclaimed, "You'll never make real money with that. It's not a career. It's a hobby." Smug as ever, Ryan sat back in his chair and said, "You need to get serious before it's too late. Perhaps you could spend some time observing me at the company. Get a taste of stability." My cousins continued to make jokes about me squandering my youth on a pipe dream and selling lemonade online. One of them spewed mashed potatoes out of their nose from laughter. I sat there trying to swallow the dry turkey and my pride while my face burned with shame. The words stuck in my throat as I tried to yell at them, to let them know they didn't comprehend what I was building. What was the purpose? I was already dismissed as a failure by them. I promised myself that one day they would regret making fun of me when I lay in the bed my mother still set up like it was when I was a kid and looked up at the ceiling. They wouldn't be a part of my success when it eventually happened because of the way they treated me, not because I would force my success on them. Let's fast forward to yesterday. My company secured its first significant contract at $3.1 million. I was momentarily stunned by the size of that figure when I saw it in my account. It had finally paid off after all those late nights and times I considered giving up but decided against it. The buzzing of my phone started almost instantly. Family members who hadn't spoken to me in months called, texted, and emailed me, showering my inbox with congratulations that seemed more like demands. The first communication was from Ryan. "Heard the news. Congratulations, young brother, we ought to rejoice. I believe it's only right that I receive a tiny portion since I advised you. Only 10%. Scarlett said, "I'm so proud of you, Owen. Nothing crazy. Keep in mind that I stood by you when no one else did. You might be able to assist me in repaying my law school debt." And my mother, who had made fun of me the previous year, left a voicemail saying, "Owen, we're so happy for you. Of course, without the principles we taught you, none of this would have been possible. We'll discuss how you can support the family in the near future." Support the family? As if their contempt and mocking hadn't already taken enough from me. Since then, calls have been pouring in, with each one being more entitled than the last. "You owe us, we deserve it." I've been thinking about their foolishness all day. I still have the old pain, the urge to please my parents, and the need for their praise. However, a more resilient aspect of me, developed during those restless nights of uncertainty and isolation, recalls precisely how they handled me when they believed I would never be successful. I know precisely what I'm going to do, so here I am, staring at my phone. Before I respond though, let me clarify how deeply ingrained this family dynamic is. It has nothing to do with money. It was never the case. They don't even attempt to conceal their harshness or partiality when they believe they are in control. I had previously been their punching bag before that holiday. Simply put, it was the loudest. However, now that money is at stake, the terrible truth is coming to light. My dad called me first, and I responded primarily out of morbid curiosity. He did not offer me congratulations. He did not inquire about my well-being. "Owen, you need to come by the house this weekend," he said right away. I became enraged when he remarked, "We need to figure out how you're going to handle the money responsibly," as if I were still a teenager squandering allowance money on video games. I answered in a calm manner, "Dad, I've been handling my business just fine." "You think you have, but this is serious money," he said, laughing condescendingly. "Your tiny online experiment is no longer relevant. You can't handle millions of dollars. However, I know what to do with it, as does your mother. We will handle it. Ensure that it expands. Everyone in the family will gain from it. Not me. Not the one who lived off of instant noodles and missed weekends to get here. No." He believed that everyone save me should have credit for my efforts and accomplishments. My mother then gave me a call. She gave an order without asking. "You're coming over on Sunday, Owen." She even trotted out her well-known quote, which she had always used whenever I didn't comply with her authority. "Family comes first." But to her, family always meant that Owen was subordinate to everyone else. As if my parents' entitlement wasn't already excessive, my siblings swiftly followed suit. After making fun of me non-stop during Christmas, Ryan abruptly became my biggest supporter. In a single afternoon, he gave me 3 calls. He first said that he had always had faith in me. On the second call, he said he should handle my money because he was good with numbers. On the third call, he was direct. "See, buddy, I gave you some motivation. You have to give me a cut. Send me something modest, like 55 grand. That's nothing for you now." Scarlett, meanwhile, adopted a more sentimental stance. "You are aware of how difficult law school was for me, Owen. I gave up everything. I should be commended for that. And remember all the times I gave you rides when you didn't have a car." As if she was entitled to my whole income because she had a few rides in high school. It wasn't limited to my close relatives. My aunts, uncles, and even cousins I hadn't spoken to in years had heard about it. "Hey, congrats on the deal," a cousin texted. "Could you give me a $12,000 loan?" Another message read, "We're family, so I know you'll take care of us just until I get back on my feet. Perhaps create a fund for all of us. It's only fair." However, my mother's statement struck a chord with me once more. I swear, I listened to her voicemail 3 times because I was so shocked by what I was hearing. "Owen, don't be selfish," she said. "We made an investment in you, you know. Every meal we gave you and every penny we spent on your upbringing was an investment. It's time for you to return the favor. Your father and I put in too much effort to not notice the results." I sat there trembling, holding my phone. A financial commitment. To them, I was just that. Not a sibling or a son, just an investment that will eventually yield returns. Naturally, the analogy started to reappear. Ryan had the audacity to tell me, "You're only able to do this because we set the example." He boasted that his employer had heard about my deal and said, "Guess success runs in the family." Scarlett joined in, stating, "Your company only worked because you grew up in a house with discipline. You should be thankful. You wouldn't exist without us." The worst thing was that their need for control was equally as bad as their desire for money. In an attempt to arrange a family gathering at their home, my dad insisted that I bring all the paperwork so he could go over it. In order to appropriately entertain the holidays, my mother suggested that I purchase a larger home near them. Ryan suggested that I invest in his bookkeeping business. Scarlett stated unequivocally that if one of us is burdened, we are all burdened, so I should pay off her college loans. They were all holding winning tickets, as though they believed my triumph was a family lottery victory. It was oppressive pressure. I was pushed back into the old role they had set for me, the afterthought, the unworthy person who had to grovel for the meager remnants of their approval, by every phone call, text message, and voicemail. The scraps they desired, however, were no longer sentimental. Millions were what they want. I remained mute even though I was furious. I paid attention. I allowed them to speak. Because I was already coming up with my own plan while they believed they were dragging me back under their control. However, you must realize the extent of their entitlement before I tell you what transpired next. Not even the actual breaking point had arrived yet. The flood that followed was what ultimately turned everything upside down, if the incessant cries and demands were like water gently trickling into a glass. At first, I didn't anticipate it. Their conceited remarks and blatant demands, in my opinion, were already terrible. However, when individuals like my family smell money, they take, rather than merely ask. It began modestly. 3 weeks after I signed the contract, I saw an important email from my bank one morning. It stated that there had been several unsuccessful attempts to log into my account. At first, I disregarded it, thinking it was just a fraudster or bot. However, the bank's fraud department called me later that day. Someone had been attempting to enter my account using my personal information, not just to examine it but also to modify the recovery information that was associated with it. My stomach fell when the banker hesitated before responding. It looks like the attempts were made using security questions, things only close family would likely know. Who would know the name of my first pet, the street where I grew up, or the mascot of my high school but my parents and siblings? My intuition told me the truth, but I wanted to think it was a coincidence. My account has been attempted by members of my own family. I refrained from confronting them right away. I chose to wait and see whether they might slip instead. And they did, indeed. My mother sent me a group text a few nights later. It was not at all subtle. "We had some difficulty accessing your account today, but don't worry, we'll work it out," she responded. Simply said, "Managing this money by yourself is too dangerous for you. We must ensure its protection." My heart thumping, I gazed at the screen. They hadn't even made an effort to conceal it. For them, accessing my account was a form of protection, rather than theft. I typed one word back. "What?" My dad called very immediately. He spoke in a steady, nearly practiced voice. "Listen, Owen. You lack the maturity to handle that amount of money. You will be destroyed by it. We have witnessed individuals lose everything due to a lack of direction. Your parents are us. We are expected to intervene. We've already decided that granting us access is the best course of action. We'll handle everything for the time being." The way he stated, "We already agreed," made me shudder. "You can concentrate on your little projects while we handle the serious stuff." Like vultures circling over a meal, my parents, siblings, and most likely even extended family had actually sat down and discussed how to divide up my accomplishment. Ryan wrote me a smug message that evening. "I'll assist in investing a portion of it once my parents have access. Bro, don't worry. I'll see to it that it grows." Then Scarlett, the lovely, accomplished Scarlett, spoke in a voice full of fake sorrow. "You'll thank us later. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be, Owen. You are aware that the stress of having too much money is too much for you. Let's assume control. Don't hold on to it and make yourself look foolish. We are related. Shares throughout the family. Family shares." The sensation of that moment is beyond words. Erasure was more than just treachery. They were attempting to take away the same things I had spent years establishing, my identity and independence, when no one else had faith in me. They were acting with the same arrogant assurance that they had always used to tell me that I was insufficient. The emotional tipping point came that evening. I wasn't merely upset. I felt chilly. I became aware at that point that they did not regard me as a brother, a son, or even a human being. They viewed me as a bank, a resource that needed to be depleted until nothing remained. I refrained from confronting them right away. I didn't scream or shout. I gave them the impression that they were winning instead. As I silently started to distance myself, I allowed them to discuss meetings, plans, distributing finances, and establishing boundaries. Because they were going to discover how mistaken they were if they believed that I was going to give them all I had worked so hard to earn. But you must realize how far they pulled me down before I can discuss what I began to plot. How I was on the verge of losing everything until I mustered the courage to make things right. Growing up as the family's punching bag makes you resilient. You come to take in the insults, the contemptuous laughter, and the silent groans of disappointment. However, nothing had ever pierced my soul as much as discovering that my own parents had made a concerted effort to steal everything I had created. Not only did that betrayal hurt, but it also made me feel empty. I had a burden that hung over me like a shadow for weeks after learning about the attempted account breach. My phone was buzzing non-stop with calls, messages, and well-crafted reminders about family responsibilities as I lay awake in my apartment, staring at the ceiling. Even in silence, they were developing their story, but I stopped responding to the most of them. All of a sudden, I was the egotistical kid, the unstable idealist, and the one hoarding money that wasn't truly mine. The seclusion was cruel. You must realize that aside from them, I didn't have much of a support network. I had been the odd man out for a long time, too preoccupied with my business to make many acquaintances. My parents had their country club dinners, my siblings had their co-workers, and I had my apartment, my laptop, and the dim hope that one day it might all be worthwhile. Now that I had $3.1 million in my account, I ought to have felt victorious. Rather, I felt more alone than before. I gave up going out. I didn't eat much. Every time I got onto social media, I seen their happy faces and group photos that I wasn't invited to, so I avoided it. From the screen, captions like, "Family is everything," made fun of me. Texts continued to accumulate in the meanwhile. "Don't drag this out," Ryan wrote in one. Scarlett attempted to guilt trip me by saying, "It's unbelievable that you're excluding the people who brought you up. Just let us handle the money before you ruin it. If you don't come home soon, we'll have to take steps to protect you from yourself." Protect me from myself. Mom had been crying all week, and Dad left a voicemail that echoed in my mind, as they usually did when they tried to justify controlling me. It had to do with who I could hang out with when I was younger. It was about which college I should go to when I was a teenager. It was now, as an adult, about the money I had earned. The fact that a tiny, delicate part of me still desired their acceptance was perhaps the worst aspect. If you just give in, if you just let them take control, they'll finally love you, a voice inside me whispered, and it almost crushed my heart. I was starting to doubt everything. Did I have the capacity to handle this money? Was my reluctance to share selfish? Was I unappreciative of their calls? There were evenings when I nearly gave in, nearly picked up the phone, and nearly gave them the keys to all I owned. That was the lowest point. Not only did I feel alone and betrayed, but I also realized that despite everything they had done, I still yearned for their praise. Then, however, something changed. I took out an old notebook one evening that I had used to jot down business ideas back when the company was just a dream. I had lists of things I desired for the future, half-baked schemes, and sloppy sketches all over the pages. Years ago, on a very dark night, I wrote in bold characters on one page, "Do this for you." I gazed at those words until my eyes burned. For me? Not for them. Not to win their favor. Not because they applauded. I made the decision that night that I could no longer play defense. I had to start pulling away if they were going to continue pushing. I started quietly looking into financial advisors, real ones, screened, reliable, and unrelated to my family. I shifted some of the money, created protections, and started different accounts. I began reading about legal protections, trusts, and how wealthy people protect themselves from avaricious family members. Although it was intimidating, it was also empowering. I began establishing distance at the same time. I ceased responding to all of the messages. I did not return their calls. I was aware that it infuriated them, but I was unable to grant them the desired access to my thoughts. My quiet gradually turned like a shield. However, the storm on their side continued to intensify even as I started preparing to defend myself. Threats replaced the guilt-tripping. Ultimatums emerged from the concealed anxiety. They were now moving in for the kill, rather than merely circling. I was pushed over my breaking point when they made their most audacious move to date. At that point, I ceased to be the reserved, timid son they could manipulate and began to transform into somebody quite different. I don't remember the betrayal or even the loneliness when I think back on that terrible period. I stopped allowing their voices to determine who I was at that very moment. There's an odd clarity about rock bottom. You begin to see things more clearly and sharply after losing your illusions and the cloud of hope that others will change. That was the start of my ascent. I started by looking for a financial advisor who had no familial ties and had no motive to take sides. Martin was his name. He was a calm, sharp-eyed man in his mid-40s who could explain intricate financial systems without ever making you feel foolish. He didn't laugh or brush it off when I informed him about my family's predicament. "You're not the first client I've had with this problem," he remarked, leaning back and steepling his fingers. "Money has no power to alter a person's identity. It merely reveals them." Martin became my silent ally throughout the course of the following few weeks. "Let's make sure they never touch a cent without your consent." He assisted me in creating barriers between me and the funds, such as trusts, accounts in my company's name, and legal frameworks. The goal was to build a wall that no entitled relative could climb, regardless of how many family gatherings they had. It wasn't about being paranoid. I slept well for the first time in months because I knew that my parents and siblings would run into iron-reinforced brick walls if they did anything. However, my ascent involved more than just financial gain. After spending years glued to my laptop, I finally started exercising. I joined a gym to regain control over my body, not to impress others. After years of fatigue, I gradually started to feel stronger again. The shame they had ingrained in me for so long began to fade as my posture straightened and my thoughts became clearer. My business expanded along with my confidence. I never would have thought that the initial $3.1 million deal would open doors for me. All of a sudden, those who had disregarded my emails were contacting me and wanting to work together. Even though they weren't as big as the first deal, I nevertheless signed 2 more. Each one demonstrated that this was genuine, long-lasting success rather than a fluke. My cousins used to make fun of my small internet lemonade stand, but now it was a respected business. Juggling this personal triumph with my family's increasing needs felt unreal. I would look at my phone, shake my head, and go back to a conversation with investors who genuinely appreciated what I had created each time it buzzed with another deceptive message. The sound of contracts being signed, agreements concluding, and opportunities piling up one after another overshadowed the faint echo of their laughter from the previous Christmas. However, I was surprised by how empowering quiet might be. I ceased introducing myself to them. I stopped justifying my decisions. Every time my father left a message, he would say, "You need to stop being stubborn." "This is larger than you," I said without replying. I ignored Ryan when he texted, "We'll have to step in if you don't let us in soon." And I just preserved Scarlett's lengthy, heartfelt note about how I was destroying the family. "Stop stoking the flames. I will no longer allow them to misrepresent what I say." Rather, I concentrated on my career, my well-being, and gradually, establishing relationships beyond them. I got back in touch with a former college acquaintance who had always had faith in me. Even though I was constantly exhausted by social gatherings, I started going to networking events. I was surprised to meet folks who didn't view me as a walking bank, understood the hustle, and valued the grind. It seemed like I was escaping a cage I had been unaware I was in. Every accomplishment and bit of growth felt like evidence that I wasn't the failure my family had portrayed me as. Their voices had less and less influence over me as I developed. The problem with developing strength, though, is that the individuals who once held you back don't simply disappear once you start standing taller. They exert more force. They strike out. They become desperate. And my family did precisely that. They crossed a new threshold as my business grew and I gained strength, making it obvious that this was no longer just petty entitlement. It was war. It took time to go from defense to offense. The feeling that they will eventually force my hand was more like a faint hum that pervaded everything I did. And they did indeed. My family acted in ways that were almost unreal after they realized I wasn't going to cave, as though they had forgotten that I wasn't the same defenseless child they used to abuse. My mentor Martin called me, and there was the first crack. "Owen," he added cautiously, "your parents attempted to get in touch with one of the banks that house your business accounts. I don't want to worry you." I recall sitting motionless and holding the phone so firmly that my knuckles became white. "They said they were acting on your behalf." "For me? How?" Martin stopped to allow the gravity of the situation to set in. "They claimed to have your consent and even sent over a letter with a shaky-looking signature. Naturally, we reported it right away. However, you must realize that they are no longer asking. They are attempting to forge your hand with this." I felt a silent rage stirring within me. They had attempted to harm me by using my own name. I started excavating that evening. I engaged Dana, a straightforward private attorney who focused in family law and wealth preservation. She listened to everything, even the phony letter, the bank's fraud alerts, and the derisive laughing from the previous Christmas. She slowly shook her head when I was done. "This goes beyond simple entitlement. This is on the verge of financial abuse. They risk legal repercussions if they continue in this manner." Legal repercussions. I kept thinking about those words, and I realized for the first time that I wasn't helpless. I was no longer merely responding. I had allies and tools that weren't dependent on them. I worked discreetly with Dana and Martin throughout the course of the following few weeks, strengthening my defenses. We created legal documents that unequivocally stated my independence. In order to notify me if someone even murmured my name to a bank, we built up surveillance devices. Above all, I began recording everything, including every voicemail, deceptive text, and attempted hack. Initially, maintaining such thorough documents seemed trivial, but Dana reassured me that paper trails are power. This will disprove any assertion that you are unstable or unfit. Then, in the middle of all, I discovered something unexpected. Ryan had become irresponsible. He shared a picture of himself and a few friends at a bar on social media. Big smiles and lifted drinks. Normally, I wouldn't have given a damn, but the caption, "Everyone eats soon when your bro finally cashes out," attracted my attention. It was more than simply boasting. Everyone eats soon. It was an admission. Evidence that he had been informing individuals that they could take my money. As I read the remarks, my chest constricted. His friends wrote things like, "Man, your brother better hook you up big time," and "Can't wait for that payout." He had obviously been babbling, portraying me as a certain way to get rich. I needed that particular piece. It was no longer just a matter of entitlement. Exposure was the cause. How long before one of the strangers knocked on his door if he had been telling them he expected a cut? Every screenshot, comment, and timestamp was kept by me. I then began to pay more attention. Scarlett also made a mistake a week later. She texted me, but it was intended for someone else. "Don't be concerned, I'll cover you when Owen eventually gives in." She hastily attempted to remove it and added, "Oops, wrong chat. He still owes us. Funny. Ignore that." However, I didn't disregard that. By then I had discovered something important, so I preserved it. They would put more rope around their own necks the more I gave them. My life was getting better while all of this was going on. Another sale, smaller but with a well-known client that contributed credibility I couldn't have purchased, was secured by my company. I received an invitation to speak at a panel about entrepreneurship. People outside of my family were treating me with respect instead of contempt for the first time. My resolve was unwavering because of the contrast between the respect I received from the outside world and the greed at home. Because I was more than simply a wealthy man now. I was a man with legal protection, allies, documented proof and influence. Although my family believed they were surrounding prey, they were actually further entangling themselves in a trap that I hadn't even had to set. I knew they thought they were getting closer, prepared to finally take what they thought was theirs, as the holiday season drew near once more, precisely 1 year after the night they had laughed me out of the room. However, I was already in position, stronger than I had ever been, and I was just waiting for the right opportunity to let them know how much they had misjudged me. I was aware that their conceit would ultimately lead to their demise. I only needed to wait. Fuel came from every voicemail, every deceptive message, and every arrogant belief that I was still the child they could manipulate. By December, a full year after that embarrassing holiday dinner, I was ready to respond in a way they would never forget, in addition to defending myself. My mother, of course, sent out the invitation. 2 weeks prior to Christmas she called, her voice smothered in the phony coziness that only she could manage. "Everyone is coming over this year, Owen. It will be pleasant to celebrate as a family. After all, isn't this year unique?" She left that final, heavily implied sentence hanging in the air. I understood exactly what she meant. My accomplishment was theirs to claim, not just mine. They would expect me to pass it all up at the holiday dinner. Calmly and softly, I accepted the invitation, and in the days before, I completed my preparations. Dana had assisted me in writing letters that made it clear that none of my family members had any legal control over me or my business. Martin had made certain that every asset was out of their grasp. I had all of my evidence, including voicemails, texts, and screenshots, carefully arranged in a folder. However, I had no intention of yelling, making accusations, or raising my voice. I understood that retribution ought to be unquestionable, not loud. I smiled steadily when I entered my folks' home at nightfall. Silverware gleamed as candles flickered in the dining room, just as they had the year before. Around the long wooden table, everyone gathered. Instead of making jokes about my internet lemonade stand, this time the room was filled with barely veiled expectation and forced congratulations. As I walked in, Ryan gave me a pat on the back. "The millionaire is there." He smirked at his wife, who chuckled a bit too loudly. "Remember your favorite brother when the gifts start flying." Leaning in, Scarlett planted a kiss on my cheek. "Owen, I'm so proud of you." "Really?" My father held up a glass of wine toward me and exclaimed, "To Owen." His voice booming, finally demonstrating that he was a part of this family's tradition. "You know, law school was such a burden on me, but I'm sure you'll help lighten that load." Around the table, there was courteous but famished applause. Not me, but what they believed they were going to get was what they were toasting. Even though I hardly tasted my food, dinner proceeded as usual. I let them to speak in circles, giving me clues and sowing seeds. "Perhaps you'll purchase a larger home close by. Perhaps you will invest in Ryan's company. Perhaps you may settle Scarlett's debts." The word maybe become their most obvious cover for when. Eventually, after dessert was cleared, my mother put her hand on mine. "Perhaps you'll finance a family vacation to Europe." "Why don't you tell everyone what your plans are, Owen?" she asked pleasantly. The place fell silent. "You've been so quiet." All eyes turned toward me. It was this. The moment they anticipated my announcement regarding the allocation of their fictitious portions of my laborious efforts. I inhaled steadily. I took a little folder out of my backpack and placed it carefully on the table. "You're right," I replied. "I've been quiet for too long, and I think tonight is the perfect time to clear things up. I experienced a lot of success this past year, and those who felt they should have a piece of it put pressure on me." I looked around the table, seeing their stiff smiles replace their smirks. I opened the folder and said, "So, I want to be clear tonight, once and for all." Printed copies of texts and screenshots were placed on top, including my parents' group message acknowledging they had attempted to access my account, Ryan's bar photo, his boastful caption, and Scarlett's incorrect text pledging money to someone else. One by one, like cards in a game, I slid them across the table. My victory was always inevitable. The quiet was overwhelming. My mother's face turned white. Ryan's mouth clenched. Scarlett parted her lips, shut them, and then parted them again. But nothing escaped. These are only a portion of what I've documented, I added softly. Every phone call, voicemail, and threat to my accounts. Everything was carefully preserved. All readily given to the appropriate individuals if I so choose. Leaning back, I allowed my words to sink in. Let's be crystal clear then. You all have no right to my money. Not a single penny. Never. Ever. This is mine. Built in spite of your ridicule, without your belief, and without your support. And I won't be the next person you hear from if any of you attempt to meddle once more. It will be my attorney. Nobody moved for a long time. There was a noticeable change in power, a seismic fracture in the base of authority they believed they had. Ryan scoffed at last, attempting to regain his confidence. You're playing a bluff. I met his stony gaze and said, you wouldn't drag your own family through the mud. Give me a try. I left the folder in the middle of the table, the evidence like a ticking time bomb, and got up. They were unable to dissipate it. Their astonished quiet followed me like an echo as I left that dining room with my head held high. I wasn't the one trembling under their laughing for the first time in my life. Under mine, they were getting smaller. However, that was just the start. Because the actual tale started with what transpired after that night, the aftermath, the desperation, the scramble when they discovered I was serious. Although it wasn't instantaneous, the aftermath happened quickly. I would never again enter my parents' home as the version of me they believed they could control after that holiday dinner. Not only was I leaving dessert behind when I left the folder on the table, but I was also leaving behind years of their control, their arrogant superiority, and their conviction that I would be nothing without them. I believe they knew it too, deep inside. The next morning, the first wave struck. Ryan's urgent, fast-paced messages flooded my phone. He was furious at first. Then came the guilt. You're really going to destroy the family over money? You're pathetic. The desperation began to creep in by the afternoon. Bro, I was just joking in that post. You know I'd never really take from you. Okay, maybe I messed up, but please don't go to a lawyer. I could lose my job if this gets out. I didn't respond. Scarlett was a little more subdued. She made 3 calls and left lengthy voicemails explaining that she only ever wanted the best for me, that her text had been misread, and that I should never forget the sister link. I don't know who filled your head with this paranoia, but we're family. Don't ruin everything over misunderstandings. She even sobbed at one point. However, my siblings weren't the ones that really broke my silence. It was my mother. Dripping with entitlement, she sent a stiff, icy email. That's when I realized they weren't going to stop, not out of love, guilt, or fear. Owen, your behavior at Christmas was deeply disappointing. You embarrassed this family in front of everyone. The least you can do is make amends by contributing to the household that raised you. We expect a proper discussion soon before this gets any more out of hand. Until I set a line they couldn't cross, they would continue to push and claw. And I did. With Dana's assistance, I filed official notices that prohibited my relatives from contacting my financial institutions, recorded their attempts at forgeries, and made it apparent that any more harassment would result in legal action. It was not necessary for me to take them to court. The threat alone was sufficient. Their names were highlighted by banks. The advisors were informed. It was as though they were surrounded by imperceptible boundaries. The phone calls ceased. The voicemails were silent, then bitter. Ryan ceased sharing his arrogant captions. Scarlett fell silent and withdrawn. Despite their bravado, my parents appeared to recede the most. They stopped sending me their cynical, family comes first texts, and stopped inviting me to dinners. They appeared to lose the drive to act as though I belonged once they discovered they couldn't control me or my money. And what do you know? I was okay with that. Because I flourished while others scrambled. My company continued to expand. My circle grew. I felt liberated from their bonds for the first time in my life. At the dinner table, I was no longer the failure. I wasn't an afterthought. I was a self-made man who had at last come to terms with the most difficult reality of all. Blood does not define family. Respect is what defines it. When the holidays returned a year later, I didn't go back to that dining room. I chose to spend it with friends instead, folks who had supported me without expecting a cut of my achievement. We ate, joked, and raised a glass to another year of development. As the evening drew to a close, I reflected on the time my mother had made fun of me and said I would never be able to earn a living. I grinned to myself, clearly, not resentfully. The reality was straightforward. They hadn't simply undervalued me. They were no longer a part of my future. To doing this for me, I whispered softly, almost to myself, as I lifted my glass. The words were not a promise for once. They were a triumph. The last line, they believed that my success would make me theirs, but it ultimately set me free from them permanently.